Good afternoon. This is Helen Folks, and I will be presenting transitional standards for milk, sodium, and whole grain. Please use your chat box as I go through the presentation to ask any questions that you may have. The state agency team is on standby and will be ready to answer questions at the end of this session. I would like to open coverage of this topic by explaining that USDA is working to implement updates for the coming academic years as part of ongoing efforts to enhance healthy, nutritious school meals while agencies and CNP operators are working to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. These transitional meal standards planned for implementation over the next 2 school years are intended to give schools time to transition from current pandemic operations to more typical operations and meal patterns. These standards include updates to milk, whole grains, and sodium requirements for school meals. USDA has emphasized a gradual transition from the extraordinary circumstances caused by the pandemic to normal program operations and meal standards that are consistent with the dietary guidelines for Americans. The transitional standards include that any schools may offer low-fat 1% milk, in addition to other non-fat and low-fat milk options. At least 80% of grains in school breakfast and school lunches per week must be whole grain rich. And starting in the 23-24 school year, there will be a 10% reduction in the weekly sodium limit for school lunches only. The weekly limit for the 2022-2023 school year will remain at current levels. To emphasize the benefits of school meal participation by students, I will reference some groundbreaking research and studies that have led to a USDA fact sheet celebrating the health impact of school meals on our nation's children. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack emphasized to the media that the transitional standards will help schools transition to a future that builds upon the tremendous strides child nutrition program operators have already made in improving school meal nutrition over the past decade. The CDC has published that benefits of school meals extends to classroom improved behavior, success in academics, and benefits to overall health, which extend beyond the school day. Research shows that students who participate in the school meal programs consume more whole grains, milk, fruits, and vegetables during meal times, and have better overall diet quality than non-participants. And eating breakfast at school is associated with better attendance rates, fewer missed school days, and better test scores. Meal pattern requirements were revised back in 2012 to include more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and decrease the amount of sodium and trans fat. Research shows that these changes have helped make school meals more nutritious. Findings from the School Nutrition and Meal Cost Study published in a fact sheet in June of 2021 shows that children who eat school lunches score higher on the Healthy Eating Index, or HEI, which is based on criteria consistent with the dietary guidelines for Americans. This fact sheet is linked to the title of this slide. This pictorial shows lunches from home, represented by a blue lunchbox, and lunch at school, which is represented by a green lunch tray. Students eating school lunch have HEI scores of 80 compared to those who don't participate in school meals, having a healthy eating index much lower at 65. Also, students who eat school lunches are more likely to consume milk, fruits, and vegetables, while consuming fewer desserts, snacks, and non-milk beverages like sodas than students who brought lunch from home. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, the steadfast work and commitment of child nutrition operators continues to show meaningful changes that improve the diets and overall health of children. As a timeline of events that brought us to the transitional meal standards, I'd like to start with the event of April 13th, 2020, when the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland found a procedural error with the promulgation of the 2018 final rule for child nutrition programs. That 2018 final rule allowed meal pattern flexibilities for milk, whole grains, and sodium requirements. When this rule was vacated, it turned back the clock to the 2012 meal pattern, canceling the meal pattern flexibilities that were in place. Shortly thereafter, in March of 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. And on March 22nd, 2020, Governor Edwards issued a stay-at-home order to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. Understandably, the pandemic and related challenges dominated everyone's time and attention, specifically amongst CNP operators, responding and redesigning program operations to feed Louisiana's children in this emergency situation. I think we can all agree that this pandemic has been unlike any other emergency we have experienced in our lifetime. For that reason, messages and media attention for the vacated final rule for the meal pattern lost the spotlight. As we all know, focus on waivers and flexibilities became paramount in the world of child nutrition in order to provide meals in a new service environment. USDA waivers provided for flexibilities for milk, whole grains, and the sodium requirement. These waivers were widely elected by SFAs for school year 21-22. However, we're approaching the end of the school year and these waivers will then expire. Bringing us back to current times, 2022 has brought unforeseen consequences of the pandemic, including continued staff shortages, supply chain issues affecting foods and supplies available for purchase, as well as delivery shortages and substitutions for typical CNP bid items. These challenges, in terms of these challenges, we're now trying to figure out if or when business as usual will return and what that will actually look like in the coming school years. The transitional standards for the meal pattern that I'm presenting today is largely in response to the need for an adjustment period prior to taking the meal pattern standards back to the stricter guidelines outlined for milk, whole grains, and sodium in the 2012 meal pattern. While the intention is for everyone to make efforts to transition over the next two school years, the state agency understands that this is not just a hit or miss scenario. USDA acknowledges that the intent for the transitional meal standards is to provide a period of adjustment over the next 2 years. Remember, as we go through the training, that CNP operators are not expected to hit the bullseye on transitional standards on the first day, but we should begin working on bid specifications and communications toward meeting requirements. Pandemic issues remain, and the state agency will work with you throughout the process. The intention of the transitional period is to work toward meeting these standards, encourage operators to work with vendors, collaborate with other child nutrition program operators, and also with the state agency to overcome any barriers to meeting these standards. As a reminder, without the transitional meal standards, the 2012 meal pattern requirements would have applied. These requirements would have included that flavored milk be only non-fat, that 100% of grain served would be required to be whole grain rich, and the target 3 sodium levels were to be in place for both lunch and breakfast for school year 2022-2023, based on the vacation of the rule. In response to information provided by USDA on the traditional meal standards, the state agency issued a survey to child nutrition program directors and supervisors. The responses received from the CNP directors across Louisiana reflected the challenges and barriers experienced due to the pandemic, current supply issues, and also reflected challenges to stricter guidelines in the scope of the typical meal services prior to the pandemic. The state agency shares in the collective frustrations communicated and took the opportunity to communicate your comments during a USDA listening session. Judy Strassner was among the most vocal of state participants and strongly represented and explained the issues facing child nutrition program directors in Louisiana throughout the USDA call. At this stage, the most impactful way to get your message to policymakers is to comment directly on the Transitional Meal Standards final rule on Regulations.gov. Please use the QR code on this slide or the link on this page to comment on upcoming standards. Please note that you may submit your comments on Regulations.gov as an individual, as an organization, or anonymously. Comments on this final rule must be submitted on or before March 24th, 2022 to receive consideration. Next up is a snapshot of the Transitional Meal Standards. The good news regarding the Transitional Meal Standards is that schools may offer flavored low-fat milk, also known as 1% flavored milk, in addition to unflavored low-fat milk and flavored or unflavored non-fat milk. This option will remain in place over the next 2 school years, being school year 22-23 and extending throughout school year 23-24. In terms of sodium, the limit for school lunch and breakfast will remain at the current target 1 level for the entirety of next school year, being school year 22-23. This will allow planning over the next school year for school year 23-24. At that time, school lunch meals are the focus and will require a 10% reduction in sodium. Instead of going to the stricter target 2 or target 3 sodium limits previously planned, USDA has determined that a target 1A sodium limit will apply to lunch only. Breakfast patterns will stay at the same target 1 level through the next 2 school years and through the end of school year 23-24. For whole grains, at least 80% of the grains served over the course of a week must be whole grain rich. It is important to note that the definition of whole grain rich continues to mean that at least half or 50% of grain ingredients in a recipe or product formulation statement must be whole grain. There is no need to change recipes that already qualify as whole grain rich to meet these requirements. The change in requirement is reflective of a shift from half of the grain offerings offered over the course of the week being whole grain rich to 80% of the grain offerings over the course of the week being whole grain rich. I will go into more detail on the standards as we progress through this training. While the transitional rule impacts the types of milk allowed, sodium levels, and whole grain rich items required, the following areas will not be impacted in the rule. And that will include the amount of food required in any component, fruits, vegetables, meats, and meat alternate components, calorie ranges, saturated fat limits, and age grade groups. Schools and industry shared that it was not realistic to go back to the 2012 standards due to the challenges presented during the pandemic. In response, a 2-step approach was developed by USDA to allow time for collaborative work with the goal of a new rule for permanent long-term standards for school meal patterns. The long-term plan will be built on the progress already made by child nutrition program operators in implementing healthier meals for students over the last decade. The next step in the development of permanent standards will encompass nutrition science reflected in the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, engagement of stakeholders, and public input on proposed changes will be collected and evaluated. Finalization of permanent standards and implementation is expected to take place for school year 24-25. Goals for the standards include that they will be practical, achievable, nutrition science-based, and developed to put children's health as the top priority. Effective July 1st, 2022, transitional meal standards for milk will extend into school year 22-23 and school year 23-24. The transition allows the option to serve flavored, low-fat, or 1% milk in NSLP and SBP. Remember that flavored, non-fat skim milk is still an option. Unflavored milk must be offered at each lunch and breakfast meal service, being either 1% or non-fat. This option for flavored, low-fat milk extends to smart snacks in schools. C&P operators still have the option to not offer flavored milk and simply offer 1% and fat-free unflavored milk. Offering a variety of milk options is still a requirement in the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. Lactose-free and reduced lactose milk meet requirements for fluid milk, and no written or medical statement is required for provision of those items. Hopefully, the flexibility to offer 1% flavored milk as part of the milk variety will simplify procurement of milk and allow the time needed over the next 2 years for supply chain recovery. Comments from the survey also emphasized that having options available for milk has helped increase consumption of milk by children. At a minimum, at least 80% of the grains offered over the week must be whole grain rich. The remaining 20% of grains must be enriched. This allows flexibilities in terms of substitution of a grain item when certain items are not available. This also allows for an enriched grain to be served when the whole grain rich item is not as acceptable to students. Whole grain rich means that a product or recipe must contain at least 50% whole grain. The remaining grains in the recipe or product must be enriched. This is not a change, so the whole grain rich recipes and products approved for use in the child nutrition programs prior to the transitional meal standards are still considered as the part of the 80% requirement for whole grain rich offerings over the course of the week. When thinking about the 80% whole grain rich requirement, this will typically mean that 1 2-ounce portion of bread grain per week may be enriched. The remaining grains offered over the course of the week by meal type must be whole grain rich. For resources on whole grain rich items, refer to the links highlighted in teal on this slide, including the USDA Food Buying Guide, the whole grain resource for the National School Lunch and School Breakfast program, and the Exhibit A Grains tool. For menu planning to meet the 80% whole grain rich requirements over the course of the week, this table shows that an enriched 2-ounce grain is offered on Friday. The remaining days of the week, Monday through Thursday, show 2 ounces of whole grain rich items offered. Although there are other options for meeting the 80% whole grain rich goal, a once-a-week substitution or planned enriched grain is likely the most straightforward and easy to understand method for menu planning and for instructing child nutrition program managers and staff. The state agency does understand that while bid specifications and ordering can be implemented to meet this goal, supply chain disruptions and or delivery substitutions may disrupt the best made plans. With this in mind, the state agency plans to work with SFAs as the transitional meal standard goals are in the process toward achievement. In discussion of sodium targets for the transitional rule, the same Target 1 sodium limits that have been in place for several years will continue throughout next school year, being school year 22-23. The school year of 22-23 is intended to allow time for product reformulation by manufacturers, school menu adjustments, recipe development, and training of child nutrition program managers and staff to decrease sodium in meals. While the school breakfast program meals will maintain the Target 1 sodium limits for school year 23-24, the interim Target 1A will go into effect for school lunch only on July 1st, 2023 for school year 23-24 implementation. The reason the target is changing for school lunch is because there is a greater need to decrease sodium in school lunch than there is for school breakfast. This Target 1A is less restrictive than the Target 2 and Target 3 guidelines initially planned for implementation, but still puts school meal programs on a path toward sodium reduction. Let's take a look at what the sodium target levels will look like over the next 2 years at lunch. In year 1, the Target 1 levels remain the same, while in year 2, there is a 10% decrease in the maximum sodium levels for school lunch. Sodium levels are set by age grade group. As an example, the Target 1 sodium levels for K through 5 are limited to 1,230 milligrams at lunch during the 22-23 school year, and will then decrease to 1,110 milligrams at lunch for the 23-24 school year. Sodium levels apply as an average over the course of the week and are not set at daily limits. This allows for some flexibility over the course of 5 days, with some menus being higher in sodium and others lower. The sodium chart for the school breakfast program remains as it has been at the Target 1 level for the next 2 school years, including school year 2022-23 and school year 2023-24. As with the National School Lunch Program, sodium limits apply on average over the course of the school week and do not apply on a per day basis. And again, this allows for higher and lower sodium breakfast menus to balance out over the school week. In order to provide creative ways to boost flavor with less sodium, this sheet titled "What's Shaking for School Nutrition Professionals" is linked in the title above. It provides education about the importance of decreasing sodium in children's diet, and schools can make a difference. This guide provides guidance on using herbs and spices, including flavor stations where students can add seasoning without adding sodium to appeal to their tastes. It provides access to explore newer, lower sodium recipes, encourage ways to maximize the use of USDA foods that are no added salt or low sodium, and information on how to write bid specifications for appealing lower sodium options. Now that we have covered the transitional standards for the next 2 school years, let's go over a summary of the new rule. Starting July 1st, 2022, school food service will have the option to serve flavored, low-fat milk in the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. This option is also extended to smart snacks. Whole grain-rich foods will constitute 80% of the offerings over the course of a week's menu for both breakfast and lunch. The remaining 20% of grains must be enriched. Sodium targets will remain at Target 1 for all of next school year, being school year 22-23. For lunch only, A target 1A will require a 10% reduction in sodium. For the school breakfast program, the sodium target will remain at target 1 for the next 2 school years, being school year 22-23 and school year 23-24. As a resource to implementing the transitional standards, access the Child Nutrition Recipe Box by going to the Institute of Child Nutrition's USDA Standardized Recipes page and explore the expanding recipe selections that meet the requirements outlined in the transitional standards. The Child Nutrition Recipe Box at the upper right corner of this page is hyperlinked directly to ICN's site. The state agency and USDA is encouraging comments on the transitional standards final rule. USDA invites comments on transitional meal standards for milk, whole grain, sodium, suggestions related to implementation of nutrition goals that are described in the dietary guidelines for Americans, and other meal pattern changes that may be needed. Comments must be submitted by March 24th, 2022 in order to be considered. A link to the Regulations.gov site for commenting is provided and is linked here on the screen, or you could also use the QR code on this page. Over the course of many years and highlighted responses from the Transitional Meal Standards Survey, CNP directors, staff, and stakeholders have worked diligently toward providing healthier school meals to prioritize the health and well-being of the children they serve. In closing, the transitional meal pattern training portion, I would like to celebrate with you the successes shared by CNP directors across the Louisiana in meeting meal pattern goals progressively over the years. Students are picking up a fruit or vegetable with each meal. Whole grain rich blended products that include 50% whole grain rich ingredients at a minimum are now widely accepted by students. A variety of whole grain rich foods once foreign to the students in Louisiana are now welcomed and consumed by students. Milk consumption by students has increased as part of school meal participation. And finally, grab-and-go services have expanded and are now widely accepted by school staff and have resulted in improved participation. And now I'd like to take a moment to review any questions that may be in the chat box. If you have a question and haven't put it in already, please go ahead and do that right now. Now, although I'm not receiving any questions in the chat box at the moment, I did want to emphasize that sometimes you'll go away from the meeting and then think of several questions that come to mind. So please contact the Louisiana Department of Education Division of Nutrition Support by emailing childnutritionprograms@la.gov, or we can be reached by phone at 225-342-9661. I did want to emphasize that these trainings are posted on the Louisiana Fit Kids site. They'll be posted in video form, and also the slides will be posted so that you can access different links and information. If you are needing the links right away, please contact me at helen.folks@la.gov, and I can send you the information that you need. I want to thank everyone for your time and participation today, and have a great afternoon. In order to ensure that everyone has access to the QR code and to the comment area for the transitional meal pattern standards at regulations.gov, I'm going to leave this slide up for just a couple of minutes.